All right, thank you, Ron. I really appreciate it. Thank you, guys. There's not going to be a mic, so can everybody hear me okay? Is it project? Okay, awesome, beautiful. First off, I just want to thank you guys all for truly being here today on such an important subject. I know that sometimes I don't have to remind most people that, in our society today that we're confronted with a lot of problems. We're confronted with a lot of issues and stuff, and some of those issues, unfortunately, have to do with belief systems. And it's not just religious belief systems. It's not just spiritual belief systems. There's different types of systems that people have believed in and thought their reality were based upon those decisions. And so my goal is to challenge those belief systems and why it's important to challenge those belief systems. So what do we believe and why? I want to kind of talk a little bit about who I am and what it is I'm doing so you guys can kind of get a feel for what it is I'm trying to do. My name is Ben Fama Jr. I am a filmmaker. I'm a podcaster. I have a podcast called Reality Trip with Ben Fama Jr. where I try to interview psychologists and researchers and other freethinkers, other atheists, and have like honest discussions, kind of a no-nonsense discussion about stuff. I'm also an entrepreneur out in Sedona, Arizona. I own my own video production company business where I help brands and businesses kind of get their branding messages out there. So I'm a former graduate of the Sedona Film School and the Zaki Gordon Institute for Filmmaking. And like Ron had mentioned, I made a film called A Virus Called Fear. It has Richard Dawkins in it, actually, and some psychologists. And the premise of what I was trying to make in the film and what I was trying to understand in the film was how irrational fears sometimes distort our perceptions of reality, okay? I'm talking about irrational fears because fears are a normal part of life, right? Fears are a normal way for us to survive, but when we develop irrational fears, it affects the way we see reality. And when I was trying to make the film, the premise I had was if you think of us as like an internet, right? Like we're all exchanging information all the time. We're always communicating with each other. I was trying to understand what are the biggest hubs of fear? What are the things that generate the most amount of fear? What are the things that are spreading the most amount of fear? And for me, my hypothesis was it was the media, it was politics, and it was religion. I couldn't think of anything more. I'm sure there's other things, but to me, that's what it was. And so that was my premise for why I decided to make the film. I'm now currently working on a new film. It's actually a full-length documentary called A Reason to Believe. And A Reason to Believe is a film about beliefs and questioning beliefs and why it's important for us to understand why we think the way we think. Why do we feel the way we feel? Now, some of you guys may or may not recognize some of the people in the film, but if you know who the people are in this film, you'll recognize that some of them are skeptics and philosophers and psychologists, but I also have people in the film that are also believers. Okay, like Betsy Chastity and Joe Dispenza. I don't know if you guys recognize them from the movie What the Bleep Do We Know? What I was trying to have was an honest discussion between both believers and non-believers to figure out where are people coming from in their beliefs. And I don't know if like some of you out there, but I used to be a former believer myself, okay? And so I really wanted to have an honest discussion. Now, some people know I'm a firebrand. I'm very outspoken. I say how I feel. It's how I think a lot of the time. And I come from the school of Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, okay? I'm not afraid to be a little bit militant. But what I wanted to do in this film was have an honest discussion where we're not just attacking people, right? I really wanted to have a real discussion where I didn't make people, make people feel stupid or dumb for feeling the way they feel. I genuinely wanted to sit down and figure out where people were coming from. And so that's what I hope to accomplish with this film today. So I'd like to show you a quick trailer. I don't know how the sound's gonna be when I pull it up, but I'll show you a quick pitch trailer. This is our trailer that we're working on right now to pitch for we're still in the fund making part of the film. We've already filmed all the film. We're in the editing process now. So this is our pitch trailer to raise funds for the film.
Communities of people hold certain beliefs. And when everybody you know holds a certain belief, when your friends hold a certain belief, it's much more difficult to let that belief go.
Most of us hold beliefs, not that we arrived at through rational calculation, but they're usually emotionally based, things that we were just raised to believe or our peer groups and our friends believe, just things we're sort of surrounded by in our culture and we come to believe for whatever reason.
It's a setting in between the input and the output that makes you who you are. those beliefs that you have set in that middle, that's what makes you behave differently on the output side than, say, your best friend.
I think it's a human condition to have beliefs. I don't think we can operate without them.
Why do I believe X and you believe Y? Why does that person believe in God and this person believes in Allah and that person believes in Krishna? We don't know exactly how to answer that.
Most of our thoughts and feelings come from our past experiences. They come from our memories.
We end up with all these kinds of beliefs. They're not the result of ignorance or lack of education. It's just part of how the brain is designed to operate.
Your brain is a record of all the things you've learned and experienced to date. It's an artifact.
Our brains naturally just find meaningful patterns, connect the dots, assuming everything you see and hear and read about is true until something else changes your mind, which is very rare.
This machine is incredibly sensitive to the smallest little causes in the environment.
We're not robots. We don't follow some pre-written code to navigate the world. We have to have an understanding of that world and how it works, what actions will have good results, what actions will have bad results, what way we can sort of be in the world.
The number one danger we face in the world right now, without any question about it, is ideology.
Ideas can be addictive just like a drug can be addictive. So what ideologies do, what religions do, what cults do, what ideological belief systems do is they tap into the brain's natural dopaminergic system, get it to fire in response to ideas rather than things.
If we can live on the same planet without tearing each other's eyeballs out, we might actually get to a point where we can sit down over a coffee or beer and we can just start talking about these important questions. And dialogue, I think, is where changed minds begin.
That's part of the human condition. You talk about why do people believe? And I think people believe because a life without belief is empty.
All the other areas of my life, I don't take on faith for good reason. No, I don't want to believe, I want to know.
So the question is what do we believe and why do we believe it? But I want to ask a much more fundamental question. Why should we question our beliefs? Anybody have any thoughts about that? Really, why this is an important thing? Why we should question our beliefs? Go ahead.
I know, when I was growing up, my parents, I was born in 41, and my parents had a German heritage, and I was taught to question everything. I mean, the sky wasn't, you questioned, did the sun come up this morning? I mean, you questioned everything, and their reason was, otherwise you get Hitler. I mean, that was their whole big thing with me. So for me, I don't believe in belief. I mean, it's just, and to me, it's just so basic that I'm flabbergasted that so many people are attached to belief. And I guess it is a question of fear and security, and people want that security of a, I don't know, it boggles my mind.
And that's a great point, and that's what I'm gonna bring up later, is exactly what it is you're saying. And like I said, I want to stress that this isn't just to do with just religious or spiritual belief. It's ideologies, right? A lot of times we ask ourselves, if in my film A Virus Called Fear, one of the things I brought up briefly was, why did people follow Hitler? Why did people join the Jamestown massacre? It wasn't that people were stupid or ignorant, right? There's reasons why people will follow groups and not question things, okay? And so for me, there's a story that keeps coming up in my mind over and over and over when we're talking about these important discussions. In fact, if you really look throughout time, we've been having these discussions for thousands of years. And so I like to bring up a story that's really, truly important to me, an important story in my life of why I'm even doing any of this and why all this is extremely important to me. The story was about 2,500 years ago by a philosopher by the name of Plato. And the story is the allegory of the cave. And I'm sure some people have heard of this story, and if you haven't, I'll briefly explain what it is and why it's important and why it was important to me. So, Imagine there's this cave. And imagine that there are these prisoners in the cave that have been born in the cave, and all they've known is this cave. And there's this fire behind them that is reflecting light onto a wall. And all these prisoners can see are the shadows of this wall. And all they've ever known are the shadows on this wall. And sometimes people would walk across this walkway and, they'd have animals and people moving, but all they could see is the shadows. And they've been in prison to where they can never look behind them and see the light that's behind them. And so imagine one day, one of the prisoners breaks free. He decides, I'm going to go out and I'm going to go see what the rest of this cave is about. And he starts to walk outside towards the light, right? At first, his eyes really can't see, right? He's kind of blinded by it. He can't really focus on anything. But his eyes start to slowly adjust. And he slowly starts to focus. He can start seeing the trees. He starts seeing the grass. He starts seeing the people. And somebody explains to him that this is the actual real world. This is the real world. This is actual reality. He walks over to a river and he even notices his own reflection for the first time. He's even aware of his own self for the first time. And as he's doing this, he notices there's a shadow on the ground. And he realizes the shadow is coming from the light. And he recognizes that the shadow is just a mere reflection of the reality. And he has that aha moment where he's like, wait a minute, we've been staring at shadows our entire life, right? So he's excited. He's like, wow, I've come across this truth. I want people to know this. I want people to be free from these chains. I want people to be free from this reality that they've been stuck in. So he goes back into the cave. And at first, again, his eyes are trying to adjust. He no longer recognizes the old world that he lived in. But nonetheless, he's trying to tell the people, hey guys, hey, there's an opening over here. There's a real world out over here. And he's standing over here on this walkway because he can't really see where he's going. But of course, he's just reflecting more shadows. And people are afraid and scared and think, who's this madman? What is he talking about? I feel uncomfortable about this. I don't know. I'm not ready for this. I don't want to deal with this. And what Plato was trying to say in this allegory is that when we try to discover truths, when we try to discover how the real world actually is, that there will be some people that may not accept those truths, that may not be ready to hear those truths. And I don't know if you're like me, but there's been many times I've provided evidence or facts or reasons for the reason why some beliefs and some things may not be true. And I notice that sometimes people still don't change their mind. Sometimes people get even more entrenched in their beliefs. And so what I really wanted to find out in my film was, why was that? It wasn't just about me changing somebody's mind. I was trying to figure out, why did the facts not change their minds? And why, for some of us, did it change our minds? So it was really important to me that my entire life, that the allegory of the cave to me was always finding that exit to the cave and finding that truth, okay? That's always what's been important to me since I was younger, is finding what the truth is, no matter what. So I'd like to briefly go into my story. Instead of me pulling out other people's stories and pointing examples to them, I like to take my own story and show you the example of how I got from where I was as a believer, okay, to someone who is a skeptic and a freethinker who actually lives in Sedona, Arizona. Okay, some people think that's an oxymoron, right? But I really want you to walk through this, and I want you to see the allegory of the cave through this story and see if you can see this reflection even in yourself, okay? I was born and raised in a city that, I don't know, maybe some of you guys have heard of. It's this little city called Las Vegas, Nevada. And it's very interesting growing up in a city like this, because Las Vegas is a town of perceptions. Okay, Las Vegas is a town of psychological manipulations. The whole town is designed to make you give up reasoning, okay? And if you're not careful, you can lose something there, okay? You can lose some money, you can lose your inhibitions. If you're not careful, you can lose your mind, and you can lose your life. And I promise you, I've experienced all of that, okay? I grew up in a very interesting household. My parents unfortunately divorced when I was very young, but I don't really remember them being married, so I'm not upset about it. I had 2 great lifestyles with 2 amazing parents. What was interesting about this, though, is my father was a Roman Catholic Republican, and my mom was a spiritual New Age liberal. And usually when I tell people, if you wonder why I'm a little crazy, well, imagine that. But it was an interesting concept because I really learned 2 different sides of a coin of understanding religion and spirituality. I went to church for many years, and then I spent a long time understanding spirituality and New Age. As a teenager, though, I was a very, very, very angry and rebellious teenager, like most teenagers. Some people say that's never changed. But for me, I had a problem with authority when I was younger. I really did. I was always in conflict with my parents back then. I was in conflict with my schools and with the police departments. I always had this distrust for authorities. It would turn out later on that a lot of my acting out and my rebelliousness and my problems dealing with my emotional issues came from me having a mental illness later on, which is why I'm also a mental illness advocate, and I believe in mental illness and talking about that, which also plays a part in the story. But even back then, I can remember asking some very fundamental questions, staying up nights, wondering like, what is God? What was the universe before the universe, right? Like I remember talking to my friends till 4 o'clock in the morning and be like, what's infinite? What is the reason why we're here? Are we in the Matrix? I remember there was these questions that really drove me to wanting to understand reality. And it was around this time too when I was introduced to New Age spirituality too. And I was introduced to crystals and psychics and telekinesis and also trying to understand God and Jesus and so to me I really wanted to figure out these deep questions. They were really, really important to me of understanding what they were. Unfortunately, as my mental illness was getting worse though, I felt like it was much harder for me to try to understand even my own self, if that makes sense. So I was really looking for answers in my life. But there would be a book that would come out in my late teens, almost early 20s, that would fundamentally throw me down a path of really wanting to understand truth for me back then. It was a book called The Great Shift, and it was by a gentleman by the name of Carell. It's actually a guy named Fred Sterling who channels an entity being called Carell. And back then, I was really into channeling. My mom would have channeling sessions at our house. She'd bring people over, and they would invoke these supernatural beings, so they said, and answer questions. And when I'm a young, impressionable young man, this really fascinated me, right? I was really interested. I was like, what is my destiny? What am I here for? And I really wanted to know. That's why I was asking questions. So a book like this would appeal to someone like me back then. And what was interesting about this book was that it made the case that we were going through this conscious awakening, right? This vibrational awakening, and that we were going through this energy field. And as we were going through this energy field, we'd be going into this new dimension. And as we're going into this new dimension, we'd be able to see colors more clearly. We'd be able to talk to people without speaking, telekinesis and teleportation, and we would be able to heal ourselves with our minds, and that galactic species would come and help us guide us through to these new ways of thinking. Now it sounds crazy now, but to me back then I really believed it, and I thought this is a very interesting prospect, and I really wanted to know more about it. I always hear these stories in religions and spirituality about these awakenings and these conscious, spiritual awakenings. So I was really interested in trying to understand that. And, for me, I wasn't prepared for a story that was in the book that kind of scared me a little bit. And it was a story of a thing called 3 Days of Darkness. And that in order for us to get to this other side, we'd have to go through this really hard transitional period, kind of like a doomsday thing. Like in most religions, there's the Armageddon, there's the doomsday. There would be war, there'd be famine, there'd be all these things we had to go through. And again, as a young man, I felt I had to prepare for this. I felt like I had to understand these teachings. I had to understand what is going on in the world. Why is this happening? It felt like doom and gloom to me. This was also around the time of the year 2000, where there was the Y2K and the end of the world stuff back then. And so I'm running around talking to my friends and being like, hey, we got to prepare for the end of the world. We got to get ready for this conscious awakening, right? And then 2000 hit. Nothing. Right? And so, like most people, when it comes to trying to explain the end of the world when it doesn't happen, I made excuses. I was like, oh, well, we weren't consciously awakened yet. We weren't ready for it. It just wasn't the time. right? There was always these excuses I had to have. I was disappointed, but I felt like we're not ready yet. This will probably happen sometime in the future. So I went on with my life, and I was like, okay, well, I'll just keep studying spirituality. I'll keep just digging deeper even more. And I can remember the following year, there was an event that happened that would snap me out of this bubble of just understanding religion and spirituality. It made me really want to understand politics in the world, and it really affected me. And I think it affected probably a lot of people. I could say before 9/11, I really didn't know much about the world that I live in. I don't even know if I cared. I'm not really sure if I understood the difference between a Democrat and a Republican or a religion or anything. All I knew is I woke up on September 11th and I asked, what is going on? Right? I didn't know. Why would somebody take a bunch of planes and fly it into the World Trade Center? Right? Rational questions we all had at that moment. I thought maybe this was Iraq, maybe this is all this. And then I started hearing the word Osama bin Laden over and over and over. It's like, Osama bin who? Who? I don't know who this person is. And they kept bringing up the word Muslim over and over. It's like, Muslims? Why would Muslims do this? In fact, the only Muslim I had ever heard of my entire life really was Muhammad Ali, maybe Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Honestly, I didn't know. But like most Americans at that time, I was feeling like these people deserve to pay a price, right? You don't come into our country and attack our country without paying the price for it. And so, like most people, I was distorted in my thinking we need to go in and invade these people. We need to go in and take over their countries. We need to go in and kill these people in order to do stuff. I didn't question it. I thought that's what we were supposed to actually do. Fast forward to a couple years later, I am a security supervisor in Las Vegas. It was 2003 on New Year's Eve. And there was a report from the FBI that there would possibly be a terrorist attack that would happen in Las Vegas. And so the FBI would work with the police department and most of the security departments in all the casinos. And they wanted us, in order to control the threat that they thought they had, what they wanted us to do is they wanted us to print off all of the people's hotel records that were in the casinos, all their credit card information, birth date, everything that they had. They wanted to print off all their information and give it to them. And so every morning, we would print out all their information. I would take all their information. I would get into my car. I would drive down to the FBI headquarters on Charleston, and I would personally hand the information to the FBI agents. And to this day, I'm sure most of those people have no idea that the FBI has their information. I was just doing my job. Why would I question it? I wanted to fight terrorism. I wanted to make, Las Vegas safe, right? Who was I to question them calling me at 3 o'clock in the morning saying, we need to show up and take a bunch of people out of one of your hotel rooms. Families sometimes out of your hotel rooms be arrested and taken away, and I'd never know why they were taken or where they were going. I was just doing my job, right? I can remember thinking, we need to go into Iraq. We need to make sure, since, there's terrorists in Iraq, that we need to go in there, we need to bomb them. So I remember one day coming home from work and watching, I worked the night shift, this was during the day, and I was watching the news, and it was during that time of shock and awe. You guys remember shock and awe when they were dropping all the bombs in Iraq? I remember watching this, and I was on the phone with my mother, and I'll never forget, she says, Benny, what if there's no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? I'm like, are you kidding me? Why would you say something like that? Why would you even say something like that about our country, right? Why would my president get on television and make the case for weapons of mass destruction if there was no weapons of mass destruction? Why would Colin Powell, a hero of the first Iraq war, make a case to the UN if there was no weapons of mass destruction? And I was mad. I was pissed off. I hung up the phone. It's like, how could people think this way? No weapons of mass destruction? And it's funny that sometimes, right when you think you really truly understand something, when you're sure that you're right about it, when you think you have all the information about it, that every once in a while, something happens that slaps you right in your face, right? Happens to all of us. For me, that was a film. And you could see here how I went into my mad, like deep descent into documentary filmmaking. This was probably the catalyst of my madness when it came to documentary filmmaking. But a documentary came out in the year 2004 that would totally wake me up to a new way of seeing something. Now, despite what you think about Michael Moore, I'm not saying I always agree with them, but as a young 20-year-old, in my early 20s, this is the first time I'd ever seen anything that contradicted what I believed about Iraq, right? This is the first time I saw information that was different than what I thought that I knew. And the first thing I thought of is, how did I not know this? How come the people around me didn't know this? How come the people I associated with myself didn't know this? How come I didn't understand what this was? And I was upset, rightfully so, that I didn't understand things about Iraq. And so what I wanted to do at that moment, especially after George Bush got reelected, is I felt I had to do something. I didn't know what. I mean, I felt even more helpless. And I was like, I need to know the truth. I need to know the truth about my government. I need to know the truth about the world. I need to know the truth about George Bush. I need to know the truth about everything, right? Unfortunately, at the same time, I was also getting much more deeper into my mental illness. And, unfortunately, I got arrested for domestic violence that same year, not with my wife now. I did not hit her, but I was angry and I broke in my house. The good thing that came from that was I was forced to take domestic violence classes and learn about psychology. It taught me about the mind, why we think the way we think, right? Why am I feeling the way that I feel? Why am I even reacting the way that I was at? So what was interesting for me at this time was that I was trying to understand the world and the politics and the uncertainty of it, but I was also trying to understand myself and all the mistakes I was making, all the pain and suffering I was causing, not only to others, but to myself. And I'm glad that I took both those paths because it forced me to ask a lot of questions. Why is it this way? Why am I this way? At the same time, I had a 12-year-old sister that died of cancer. And so I was really asking some deep fundamental questions when I was at her funeral, and they said, well, this was God's will, this was God, this is what his plan was. I said, I don't really get it. She was trying to become a doctor to help other kids with cancer. Why would she want to take my 12-year-old sister? So I was really just asking deep questions, is really what it was. Sometimes though, when you're asking a lot of questions, you're going to come across a lot of answers, right? And so I would rent 7 documentaries, seriously, a day, right? Just trying to understand politics, trying to understand the Constitution, U.S. history. Started looking farther back. I started looking at the Vietnam War. I mean, no one taught me the Vietnam War in high school. That's not my generation. How come nobody told me the truth about what was going on in Vietnam? I looked at World War II. I looked at the Civil War. I was like, how far has this been going back of the things I don't know? I started studying ancient history, like the Romans and the Greeks and the wars that they would cause, and and that would get me into philosophy and politics. And I was like, God, there's so many things I don't know, right? There's so many things that we're not even really talking about as a society. And there's generations that keep coming afterwards that keep making the same mistakes as the generation before. Why? But unfortunately, sometimes you run into answers that may not be the best thing for you either. This is a movie called Loose Change, 9/11. And if you've never seen it, I don't recommend ever watching it, okay? At the time, I was totally into it, but basically the premise of the film was that 9/11 was an inside job that was perpetrated by our government, and that George Bush and everybody had a part in this conspiracy to blow up the World Trade Centers and destroy the Pentagon and all this, okay? At the time, though, it made sense to me for searching for answers, right? And so I thought, well, there's the truth, right? There's the truth. That's what I need, is the truth. And I was like, I need to find out why our government is doing this. I need to find out what it is and what they're trying to do. And when you're trying to find those type of answers, sometimes you get connected to even more things that will support your bias. That's how I came across the Alex Jones and the David Icks and the Illuminati and the conspiracy theories. I got into Roswell and the JFKs, right? And in my mind, I'm thinking, wow, the world is really falling apart. Like, there's a whole government agency of bankers and institutions that are trying to implant chips in my hand, and something's going on, right? I really believed it. I was walking around saying that. I was like, they're going to come in and put the FEMA camps up, and our government's going to try to take away all our rights. And it was all a conspiracy theory to me. And at the same time, my mental illness was getting worse and worse and worse. In fact, it came to a point where in 2007, my late 20s, where I ended up in a mental institution because I was suicidal. For many other reasons I wish to not talk about today. But what was good about that was, again, I was confronted with psychology, right? They were teaching us about the mind, the way we think, how we understand ourselves. And I was deeply, deeply fascinated. I felt like I had to know this stuff, right? I felt like my own life really did depend upon that time. And I really dug deep into the psychology, which is what I'm really actually passionate about. So it was around also this time, though, that I started running into more documentaries. What the Bleep Do We Know? Has anyone seen What the Bleep Do We Know? Okay, if you guys don't know what the film is briefly, it's about quantum physics and spirituality mixing with science, right? And basically the premise of it is quantum physics and all this other stuff. If you just think about it, things will come into existence, right? If you just think about your reality, the reason why the world is the way it is just because the way we think, and quantum physics makes it real. But for me, as a person that was also seeking spirituality and kind of order in my life, it made sense to me. I was like, this film really spoke to me as a human being, and I thought, if we just understood the spirituality more, if we just understood what religion was trying to teach us and what spirituality and New Age was trying to teach us, maybe we could fix all the problems in the world, right? If we just combine science and spirituality, we'll find the key. And I was also introduced to The Secret, but ironically, I was introduced to The Secret. I don't know if you guys know of The Secret, the law of attraction. You think things and Ferraris and bicycles show up in your life. But I was introduced to The Secret while I was in the mental hospital. So I'm already having a spiritual crisis, I'm having an identity crisis, and then they're showing me this film, and I'm thinking I'm in a room with a bunch of people, and I think, oh, this must be science. Maybe it is the spiritual law of attraction. Oprah made it really big, it's on Larry King, it must be true, right? Everybody's saying it's true. So, me, I got my vision boards, and I got I'm trying to do all these things to try to solve all these problems, and I was like, all I need to do is put science and spirituality together, and I'll figure it out. And so I was like, I'm going to keep learning more. I'm going to keep looking and looking and looking until I run into other people that contradicted the way that I thought about reality. And it's funny when you're trying to blend science and spirituality together, because then you're going to run into science. You're going to start running into people that are going to have explanations that you may not be ready to hear. And so I kind of listened. And I even kind of agreed. In fact, for me, it was easier for me to give up the religion. In fact, you guys know most of these people debate religion mostly. They do, debate spirituality, but they mainly debate religion. So I thought, oh, well, here's the case. I can understand their, religion being wrong or whatever else. But I was like, but I still have spirituality over here. I still have this belief system over here. And so I kept digging even deeper, trying to confirm was what I believed to be true. I'd run into documentaries like 2012. Superstition or science. And this is around 2010. And this is when I met my wife, actually. And I started seeing all these patterns. You know what I'm saying? I was like, and I started, I found this new life for me, and I was like, I started seeing all these patterns about love and frequencies and fractal geometry. And then I saw these movies about 2012 about the Mayan prophecy and Terence McKenna, right? Terence McKenna and the 0 Point, and started smoking salvia divinorum, which gave me hallucinogenic trips. I was like, I need to understand reality. And then it occurred to me that 2012 might be the turning point, right? 2012 might be, like that book said in the very beginning, this is when it all comes to a head. This is when the conscious awakening is getting ready to happen. I've got to prepare. I've got to get ready for it. I've got to, but in a weird way, what was funny is I was still trying to understand the science behind it, and I was still running into people like Michael Shermer and Peter Boghossian, and so I was starting to become skeptical of it too. So I was walking this fine line between science and spirituality and being like, wait, a lot of things aren't adding up over here, but I don't know, we'll see what happens in 2012. So I decided, you know what, once and for all, I need to go somewhere where I can learn this stuff. I need to go somewhere where people can give me the answers, and a lot of religious people, they go to Jerusalem. There's Hindus, they go to India. I was like, where can I go for my spirituality? So in 2010, was it 2010 or 11? 11, I'm sorry. She's the memory bank. I don't always remember everything. In 2011, we moved to Sedona, Arizona. And I could say that the first week that I was there, I was trying to study to see whether or not all these UFOs everybody was talking about were there, and the vortexes. But ironically, to be truthful, I mean, stories are very long and complex, and I can't get into all of it, but I was starting to become much more skeptical. So even though I thought these things, I was kind of like, I don't know, man. You know, when you get that little seed of doubt, right? It's hard to make it go away sometimes, especially when you're like, wait a minute, how do I know that I'm right about this? But I just kept going along. I was trying to be open-minded about it. And it was around that time I found the film school. So I thought, here's another coincidence, you know, I'm gonna make a documentary films. And my first film I was going to make, that I ended up never making, was a film about science and spirituality. That I thought I was looking at the science. I thought, if we just recognize the frequencies and the science behind things and the fractal geometry, that if we got past the fear-based frequencies and we understood the love-based mathematical frequencies, that we would evolve from our real world. And that's what I thought. Until I had to do the research over and over and over again, and I realized this doesn't add up. And then this doesn't add up. And then this doesn't add up. And I thought to myself, how many things am I wrong about? Right? I was wrong about weapons of mass destruction. I was wrong about 2000. I was wrong about a lot of things in my life. I was wrong even about some of the behaviors and the actions I had when I was younger, right? And at this time, I'm getting therapy. I'm getting my life back together. I'm learning cognitive behavior therapy. I don't know if you guys know what CBT is, but it's basically a therapy where you have to recognize your own thoughts and challenge them, especially if they're negative. You know, maybe you don't think you're good enough or smart enough, or you're going through depression. You have to challenge that. You have to take a step back and look at them and really analyze it and be like, would this evidence hold up in court? And so for me, I was doing that not only with myself, but I was doing it with spirituality, conspiracy theories, and everything else. And lo and behold, 2012 came. I was like, that's it. That's my final holdout. December 21st, nothing happened. Now, I don't know where most people draw their line when it comes to things. I don't know what the litmus test is for most people, but for me, I was done there. And it was a very, very hard and long process for many years, but at that point I was like, you know what, I'm done. I spent hours and hours and hours researching, talking to people, asking questions, studying the science. I'd watch debates with Richard Dawkins and Deepak Chopra. I'd watch debates with Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens. I'd watch these huge debates. I don't know if you guys watch those college debates and those big debates, but both ideas are being presented. And I realized in almost all cases, the people that had the beliefs, evidence, just did not hold up to the facts. They just didn't. And to me, I was like, why are all these people thinking this way then? Why are there so many believers? Why are there so many people that still believe? And I realized, you know, I wasn't stupid for what I believed, right? I didn't think I was stupid. I was just trying to confirm what I thought I wanted to believe. I had insecurity and uncertainty and fear, and I was just trying to find the answers like most human beings. And the allegory of the cave is important in that finding truth is not always going to be a pretty process. It's not always going to be what we want to hear. But to me, it's still important. And I thought, if I just tell people about this, if I just, challenge people, they'll see it. They'll see the facts. And I came from the school of Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, where I was pretty militant. I wasn't very nice about it, because sometimes I think when you first come out of belief, you kind of feel like you've been lied to, right? At least for me, it did. I felt like, okay, this isn't right. So I started like challenging people and attacking people and doing a lot of just, like Christopher Hitchens style stuff. But it wasn't just religion and spirituality. I started to notice that topics like climate change and vaccinations, things where there was information that wasn't even religious or spiritual, that people were still denying this. And I was like, what is going on? Why are people not changing their minds about this stuff? And so that's what I was trying to do with this film. And the reason why this is so important to me is looking at the political climate that we're living in now, looking at the world we're trying to live in now. This is what I've learned, this is what I've come to, and this is why I make these films, and this is why it's important for us to question these things and be honest with ourselves. We face real problems in this world, okay? We face real challenges. We face decisions that we've probably never faced as a human species ever. And when it comes to decision making, we have to be careful of how we critically think about those decisions. These aren't new questions, actually. You can see that philosophers have been asking these questions for a very, very long time. But sometimes these decisions can sometimes create harm, right? Your belief that you're going to die and go to some other place, and for you to get into a plane and crash into the World Trade Center, is harm. When you come into the public educational school system and try to debate evolution after science, you're creating harm. There's a way that we progress in society. When you make films like Andrew Wakefield and Robert De Niro about vaccinations and kids are getting the measles again, you're creating harm. So your beliefs don't live in a bubble. Our beliefs do not live in a bubble. And this is why we have to challenge them. Not just spiritually, religiously, but ideologically, right? There's a lot of factions that are out there that believe certain things that get within groups like we were talking about with Hitler, right? Where people just didn't question. It's because they're afraid. See, here's the thing. Fear is the reason why people can't break from those chains. And if we're going to be critical thinkers, if we're going to be rational thinkers, then we need to understand that not everybody's trying to create harm, right? Not everyone's trying to be stupid or believe whatever it is. It's just all they've known. And we have to understand that. And we need to be even empathetic to understanding some people and their beliefs and trying to understand that this is fear that's stopping them from doing it, okay? But we still need to be vigilant in questioning these things. And I realized throughout time when I studied human beings that not only are we problem-solving creatures, but we don't like discomfort. And we need to solve problems of discomfort. And when we're trying to go through survival, we're going to create whatever we need to fix that discomfort, whether we create tools, whether we create medicines because we're sick, or wear clothes because of the weather or buildings, right? But sometimes when we can't solve those problems, we'll go to other systems that may not be good for us. Sometimes we'll turn to drugs or sex or gambling or jobs where we create greed, like corporate greed, and people, we'll create systems like religion and spirituality, okay? So questioning your beliefs is not just about questioning spirituality or just religion or just conspiracy theories. It's actually questioning why you think the way that you're thinking. And for me, I believe this is a very, very important time in our society for us to be questioning how we run our lives, how we run our education, how we run our politics, how we run our healthcare. When we say we're going to make America great again, but don't know how we're going to do it, right? When we make ideas on foreign policies that aren't based in reason. This is how important it is for us to question what it is that we're trying to do. We're not trying to take away people's beliefs. We're not trying to we're not trying to take away people's religious freedoms. I'm not opposed to people even going to church and praying and singing, doing things on their own. But when you think you're not creating harm and suffering to people, especially people making laws to protect you from people who are just trying to love one another and care for each other, as I care for my own wife and my own family, that's creating harm. That's creating mental harm. That's creating a social harm in society. And so we have to challenge why we think the way we think in order for us to live in a world that we want to. I mean, we put a man on the moon, and we didn't get there by just guessing, right? It's about the process of how we come to understand things. I can make an assumption about how we get to the moon. I could say, you know what, if I click my heels 3 times, I can make it to the moon. Or I can look at how the problem was, how did we get to the moon, and solve the real problems. And that's why science for me is what I believe in, not as a religion, not even as a philosophy. I'm saying the process of science is understanding the real world that we live in, right? Testing how we live in that world and making better decisions. That's how we have better lives than we ever had. And we're not dying of old diseases, and we have safer cars, and we know so much more about the world we live in. So I don't believe that we can't solve these problems. I just think that we need to use more reason in when we do that. So that's my talk. And I'd like to have a conversation for anyone that'd like to talk about it. Thank you.